Today I want to talk about, okay, that's important. You think, what does learning have to do with counseling? There's a lot to do with it. Learning. This might even help you do a better job for, learning how to negotiate your courses here. There are two basic types of learning theory. And I'll just give you these key words. There's your classical conditioning. Maybe I should use the word condition. Theorists and your reinforcement theorists. You need to get these two basic concepts in mind, brethren. I don't want to be super academic, but I do think you need to understand these two basic concepts. Okay, now your classical conditioning is Pavlov. Okay, he's probably your key. Remember Pavlov's dog? If you haven't come across Pavlov's dog, how many have not come across Pavlov's dog? Okay, see your hand. That's a fun. Let me just help you review if you have. It won't hurt you to quickly review. Pavlov was a Russian who did some experimentation turn of the century on how do we learn, and he was working with animals, notably dogs. Pavlov had a dog that he would present some meat powder to, and the dog, obviously, when he had the presentation of meat powder, would salivate. Okay? Picture a dog salivating. All right? Presented with meat powder, he salivated. Now, he got a little idea. He says, I'm going to ring a little bell when I present the meat powder to this dog. Okay? So, ting-a-ling-a-ling, presentation of the meat powder, and the dog, of course, did his thing. He salivated. Okay? He anticipated getting a mouthful of meat powder. Okay, you with me? So every time he presented the meat powder, he'd ting-a-ling. Okay? Rang the little bell. Ting-a-ling-a-ling as he presented the meat powder. Now he started to back off the presentation of the meat powder. Every other time he'd quit presenting the meat powder and just ting-a-ling. The dog would still go what? La 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 la. He wanted the meat powder. He still anticipated. He kept doing that, and after a while, all he would do is do what? Ring the bell. And whenever he rang the bell, no meat powder at all, the dog would still salivate. All right? What had happened? There had been a stimulus, and there had been a response. Okay? A stimulus and a response. So this is important for you to see. This doesn't explain all of learning, but it explains a great deal of it. And between the stimulus and the response is this bond. And this bond we call a learning episode, or we'll just call it a learning bond. There was the presentation of the meat powder. Now, if I had gone, doggy, food, now that's a stimulus. He heard me, but he didn't go la 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 la. Why didn't he go la 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 la? Because he had not had the right kind of stimulus with the right to provoke the right kind of response. The bond was between the meat powder and the response, or secondarily, that's another point. Secondarily, it's a secondary learning response. Secondarily, it was with the ringing of the bell. Okay? So, it has to be the right kind of stimulus to get the right kind of response. But once you get a bond established, you have a learning. Okay? You get the bond by just having the experience. Okay, so here we have a simple learning episode. SR learning. Stimulus response. Classical conditioning theory. And it often happens. A child was sitting, and this is a classic response, a child was sitting playing with his little fuzzy bunny rabbit. They show pictures of this in the psychology books. And somebody comes up behind him, a mean old wicked experimental psychologist, and he makes a clang on a big gong, okay? And the child gives a startled response, okay? As he was reaching out to this fuzzy, furry little, toy rabbit, okay? Now what do you suppose happens every time he's presented with a little fuzzy, furry toy rabbit? Right. Startle response, okay? Fear. Why? Because there's a bond established. An SR bond, a stimulus with a response, you see, associated with little fuzzy rabbits. We're going to get into sexuality later, but I want you to understand the impetus to have sexual response is innate, it's inborn. Your sexuality is built into you. But the stimulus, the stimulation to evoke the response is a learned stimulus. Okay? It's something you learn. And it is entirely possible if you have no good heterosexual relationships, if you have lousy associations with the opposite sex, and somebody is warm and friendly and tender to you of the same sex, and that's all you know, and then you start having some sexual stimulation with the same sex, what are you doing? You're learning something, aren't you? You're establishing an SR bond, okay? You're establishing an association, and that association is how you learn to become a homosexual. You can learn that. And once you learn that, it's never out of your head, okay? God can give you grace, but all it takes is for one time for you to trip up, and the learning is back there full force. Case in point, we call unlearning extinguishing a response. And you can extinguish, by the grace of the Lord, the response of being, for example, a homosexual. You can extinguish it and develop heterosexual relationships. But you're a bisexual in your potential. You're a latent homosexual. You've got to realize that, like you're always having learned to be an alcoholic, having learned to reduce tension by guzzling. Everybody who treats alcoholics will say, you still have the potential of being an alcoholic. Not when you're walking in the Spirit, of course. Of course not. In the Spirit, you're more than conquerors, okay? But when you get out of the Spirit and get in the flesh, that learning is still there. Now, the Lord can selectively, He's done this, I'm sure, He can selectively take out of your memory banks all associations having to do with alcoholism, okay, or homosexuality. But for most people, the SR bond is established. Now, let's say we extinguish that behavior. Now, a number of ways of extinguishing behavior. What happens when you develop some SR bonds and learning how to play the piano? You know, you learn how to practice, don't you? You strengthen those bonds by practice. Isn't that true? Okay? By practice, you can strengthen the bonds, the learning. And so you review your notes 2 or 3 times before you come to class and take a test. But when you don't practice, what happens to your skills? They atrophy, don't they? They actually, now you don't totally lose it, but you lose some of the strength of it, okay? And it's possible if every time you put your hands to the piano, you got a mild shock. You see what I mean? It's possible for you to unlearn playing the piano. Are you with me? Yeah. You don't want to sit down at the piano. But you know what happens when you sit down at the piano and you start, sometime, let's say you didn't get a shock sometime, you started playing again and you started practicing again. The first time you sat down, a lot of things would come back to your mind, wouldn't they? It's called a principle of savings, okay? It's in your head. It's in your memory banks. And all you need is one new association to bring it back to full-blown capacity. And so this dog, this Pavlov's dog, as he gets presented to the meat powder and the little tinkling of the bell, pretty soon the tinkling of the bell will actually elicit the very same kind of response as the presentation of the meat powder. Isn't that amazing? No meat powder, I just ring the bell and the dog salivates. But what happens if I just keep ringing the bell and let the dog salivate with no more presentation of the meat powder? Pretty soon he salivates less and less and less, and pretty soon I can ring the bell until I get tired. And the dog just sits there looking at me. He's too smart, okay? What's happened? I've extinguished the response, haven't I? It doesn't pay, right? This is called Thorndike's third law. People do things because it pays. If it doesn't pay, they don't do it. Okay? It doesn't pay off. It's a basic concept in learning theory. But here's the biggest thing. All I have to do now is come back to that little dog and present the meat powder again with the ringing of the bell. Okay? One time, I present this meat powder. And of course, he salivates just like he did the first time he got that meat powder presented. And now, one time after that representation, after that, refresher association, one time after it, I ring the bell. What's he do? La, 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 la. As if he had learned it fresh the first time. It brought back all those memories. One time. Are you hearing me? You hear why people have such a hard time to get on diets? You see? They have so many bonds established between, tension reduction, the pleasure of reducing tension, and different kinds of foods. That they may last for a while, but it just takes one pairing, one reassociation before they're back into the old habits again. Are you with me? Okay, SR, classic learning theory, classical learning theory. Now there's another kind of learning that helps explain what happens. This is called reinforcement theory. And there's some overlap. I suppose in a classroom setting, at almost any, in any minute, both types of learning are going on. You can't say that they aren't going on simultaneously all the time. But reinforcement theory deals with two things: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement, for definition, is doing anything that promotes the possibility of that behavior recurring. Say it another way. A positive reinforcement is doing something to promote the recurrence of a particular behavior. Call it a reward if you want to. But it tends to promote the recurrence of a behavior. Anything. Now, what's positively reinforcing to you may not be positively reinforcing to me. Okay? I'm a nervous type. And somebody doing something to give me, stroking the back of my head, patting me on the head or something, would make me more nervous. There are other people, a touch, a tickle or something like that, would be reinforcing. Everybody's different. So this is important. If you're going to utilize reinforcement theory, like with your children, what's positively reinforcing depends on the individual. One child in your home may, be reinforced one way, and another child another way altogether. Okay, it depends on the individual as to what's reinforcing, what's rewarding, what reduces tension. And of course, the negative reinforcement is doing anything that would tend to impede or restrict or reduce the recurrence of a particular kind of action. Now, the problem with reinforcement theory is that you got to find an action already happening. Okay, you can't reinforce something that hasn't happened, right? So you've got to, get the. Let's say you want your doggy to sit up. Well, you got to catch the dog sitting up sometime, right? Or you got to help him sit up. Put him up and get him to sit up there, and so you start to use some muscle. Good dog, and you give him something like a little piece of meat, see, to help him stay up there. When he comes down, you whack him across the side of the head. No, bad dog. So now that's not a good way to do it. But I did teach a dog to sit up. I put him on the edge of a table. Okay, a work table. And if he fell, if he came forward, he would have a little fall. I would catch him, but it would be unpleasant for the dog. A little Pekingese. Boy, they're stubborn. And but when he sat up, I'd hold the meat up there, and he'd sit up, and I'd say, "Good dog," and I'd give him a piece of meat. Now, what am I doing? It's a simple reinforcement theory example. When the dog would sit up, I would tend to reinforce his sitting up by rewarding him when he would fall, when he would not want to, exert his muscles. And when I tended to want to just slouch or fall, okay, I would just let him, take a little tumble. Really, I did. I'd catch him. I didn't want to. I don't mean to be mean, but I taught that dog to do some tricks. It just takes that kind of reinforcement. How many have you done any training of anything? You can't train anything without being that way. You give them positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. You neglect either one, and it won't work. Okay. Now, we have learned that positive reinforcement for humans is a lot more effective than negative reinforcement, okay? Hollering at a kid when he's wrong is not nearly as effective as hollering at him when he's right, okay? And that's hard, okay? Because we have a tendency to be looking for the errors of people, don't we? It's easier to minister correction than it is to minister praise. But we have to learn to discipline ourselves. Okay, now I wanted to give you those basic concepts on learning. Do you have any questions? Can you see how this will help you in your ministry? When somebody comes into you and they want to be helped, you can be doing two things. You can be the learning theory will help you understand why they are the way they are, and it will help you minister to them to be better, to enjoy more fully what God has for you. Are you with me? Sir?
Okay, now you bring it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You said that we don't learn by negative.
No, I didn't say we don't learn.
We learn, but we don't enjoy the learning as well.
No, I didn't say that. Let me say it again, okay? Because I don't mean to confuse. You're right on, and I want to hear your question, but I want to say again what needs to be said. We are saying that positive reinforcement is more effective with human beings than negative reinforcement. That is not to say there's not a place for negative reinforcement, okay?
Your learning theory is going to tell you that positive reinforcement, you don't want to use punishment.
They will go that far, yes, sir. They'll say because it works better, so we cut out negative reinforcement. There's a time, though, not to cut it out, but to use it. What we're saying is that I would say with my family, 75 to 85% of my time, my discipline of my family, is positive reinforcement. Okay? But that means 15 to 25% is negative, and that's still a little high. And it's because I've not grown enough. Okay? But I say when I appreciate my wife, when I appreciate my children, I say I appreciate you. I like what you did. We don't do it enough, do we, Judy? We need to do it more. Okay? But most of our time is spent in promoting. Okay? It's saying you've done well here. I appreciate what you've done. You with me? But boy, when it comes to the times, and it's rarer and rarer, when it comes to the time that a child has disobeyed, we're quick to do it. Now, there are a lot of things we can say about reinforcement theory, but let's just take one thing about the negative reinforcement theory real quick. When it comes, it needs to be quick. Okay? Any kind of reinforcement theory needs to be as close to the action as possible. And so I was near the door when my wife was telling my young son, 3-year-old son, to come in. And he in essence was, this is just the day before yesterday, wasn't it? He said no or something. I want to go somewhere else. I didn't hear what he said, but I heard what you said. No, John, you're supposed to come in. All I needed was to hear that. It was his will against Mom's, okay? And he was making tracks. Boy, I was out that door, and I grabbed him quick, didn't say anything, but I went whack, 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 whack on his tail. Okay, about 5 or 6 good swats on the fanny. I said, and Johnny, when Mommy says obey, you obey. When Mommy says come in, you come in, right? Now that was very close. I got him very close to the disobedience, didn't I? And that'll be effective, okay? Yeah. But you know what my dad used to do to me? This was an exception. He didn't have the chance to learn this in this class, okay? But I remember one time I was trying to show my prowess. And my daddy did some building at the end of his day. He would be working on houses to get ahead. And he had some glass blocks. He used to build a lot more with glass blocks. And I was about my little boy's age, 3 years old, and I was carrying this little glass block out to show my dad as he'd get into the truck to leave. I just wanted some approval. And that was all I could do to hang on to this little piece of glass block. I said, "See, Daddy, see?" And he says, "Put that away. If you break that, I'm going to paddle you when I get home tonight." Well, wouldn't you know it? That so scared me, Uncle Plunk. Just cracked it real bad. So I carried over and put it back up. Sure enough, he saw it. And he beat my tail good. I worried all day about it. I was sick. And to this day, I don't remember being disciplined for the disobedience. I mean, any kind of disobedience. All I remember is that I went through a day of torture. You see? The punishment was too far removed from the error of my way. So, brethren, reinforcement theory is not to help you get rid of anger. You know, you don't beat the kid because you're mad at him, or because he's got it coming and you're trying to avenge, trying to do justice. Reinforcement theory is to guide, to nurture, to discipline that child. And that's why I would side with the secular humanist. You know, if the Christian is arguing, not beat the kid anytime you can get to him. That's wrong. Okay? That's when the secularist is righter than the Christian, because the Christian is just downright flat out mistaken. You don't just paddle him anytime you get to him. To be effective, you've got to punish, give negative reinforcement as close to the misbehavior as possible, or as close preferably to the right behavior as possible. And brother, that means we've got to what do you call it? The GM is doing now, the retool. We've got to retool our thinking. Because most evangelical Christendom is based on negative reinforcement, not positive reinforcement, okay? The thrust should be positive, but there's a time to put that kid's tail, okay? Don't spare the rod, or you will spoil the child. But it doesn't mean you beat the kid for everything he does wrong. Sometimes it can be negatively reinforcing just to say a strong word. My little Sherry's so tender, all I have to do is say, "Sherry, I'm ashamed." She's tender to the Lord. Mary Jo the same, right? I don't know where Johnny's going to come. I don't know yet. But some kids need more attention. This is the way they are. They don't hear you or something unless you. Another problem is my folks were convinced as I was growing up that I always needed the rod. I was a rebellious child. There's a thing called self-fulfilling prophecy. Write it down, will you please? Self-fulfilling prophecy. You can say in your mind something's going to be, and then interpret all future events in light of that prophecy you just made. And so they expected their kid to be a rebel, because that's what they called it, way back. When I was a baby, I got my first tablet when I was 6 weeks old. 3 weeks, my wife said. I forgot what she said. I thought 6. Because they were just sure. They were in a church where they're taught that, rebellion's in the heart of a child and you got to beat it out of them. So I got pounded quite a bit. That doesn't mean my folks were bad, and I bet you there's 1 out of every 3 children in this, or young people in this classroom who got the same kind of an experience, okay? Emphasis on negative reinforcement. And it's just a mistake. It's not that we do away with it, like you were saying. You don't discard it. Thank God that we have it. When my kid walks out into the street, my little brat did this when I was at Fort Wayne. That's a term of endearment. I'm disciplined. When my precious child walks out into the street, and it was a busy street, it really scared us. Well, I was right out there, and I wanted that child to hear me coming. So I go, walk, I'm running. Made as much noise as I could. And I'm yelling and I'm making it. I want to frighten the child. I really wanted to frighten the child. You get out of the street, whack! Out of the street, whack! Now, we're out of the street by that time. But I want this child to be afraid of getting out into the street, okay? Out of the street, about a couple more times, And it was really more work on me. It was probably more negatively reinforcing to me, because I had to go to so much pain. But that was appropriate. So there's a place for negative reinforcement, brother. But don't set out to fulfill your own prophecy and give a prophecy. This child is a rebellious child. Well, everybody has, the spirit of rebellion in him. Everybody can get out of fellowship with the Lord, even a child. It doesn't mean that he is by nature any more of a child of rebellion than you are. Okay? But I tell you, my dad many times made mistakes. I hadn't done it. I didn't do it. But he says, that's all right, you had one coming. Why? Because I was a rebellious child. You see? Self-fulfilling prophecy. Now listen, my dad's a good man. Okay, he is. I'm not knocking him. But that was his philosophy of discipline. And I'll tell you, it's not that uncommon. And maybe my 1 out of 3 is an understatement. Maybe 2 out of 3 in this classroom. It's rare. I have found it's really rare to find some of this balance in this area of discipline. Got a number of questions, and questions are important. I want to hit you each one. Okay, Don? Yeah.
I can understand how that was protecting now. But as an adult, will you remember be afraid to go out and...
All right, well, that can be a problem if it's too traumatic, okay? That's another good point, brethren. The reinforcement has to be fitting to the occasion, okay? Has to be fitting to the occasion. I know it's a big thing, Mama, when the little kid starts learning to be potty trained, okay? It's a big thing. And my wife has made as big a deal as any woman has ever made on a child doing his thing at the toilet, okay? But, if you make too big a deal out of it, okay, the child will, value certain things more than he ought. Well, now, listen, Freud has some observations that he made clinically over a number of years, okay? And things that happen in your childhood when they're inappropriate. I mean, too much reinforcement of any kind, negative or positive, too much learning theory. I mean, too much classical conditioning. I mean, too much anything can affect you the rest of your life. I'm going to give you a case in point. That's kind of personal. That shows it. My mother thought it only lasted about a week, but she thought she'd read Spock. Okay. She felt my dad was excessive, and she was trying to moderate him. She pulled him off my tail many times when I was a little kid. But she was reading Spock, and that was the only thing she knew as an alternative. And it was set aside. But she learned one good thing out of it, she said. And that is, when you're trying to potty train a child, she says, and Spock says this, and you put him on the potty, you turn the water on, okay, when you want him to potty. Okay? So that he will come to associate, remember classical learning theory? He will come to associate the turning on of the water with going to the potty. Are you with me? To this day, when I hear water running, so you can teach a child too well. That will affect him. It's really true. That will affect him in adult life. Okay, another question. Ma'am.
Okay, the reinforcement theory, the classical theory, must be quick. But let's say you're angry, you know yourself, you're not at the part where you should discipline. and you know that because of your anger within you can't control it at the moment.
Yes.
You know that that child needs to be disciplined, but you just can't. You need to release,
Yes.
get that anger out. What is the best? How do you go about?
Okay, now you made 2 points. You made 2 points. There are 2 needs. The child has a need, and you need to what? Get rid of some anger. Okay, they're not necessarily related. That's the first point, my brother. You need to get rid of some anger because your child has not done what you wanted to do. Okay, you had some goal-directed behavior. You wanted your child to be a heavenly child, right? You wanted him to perform perfectly, and he didn't do it this time, all right? You have expectations. To be a Davis now does certain things, okay? Your expectations have not been met. Interference with goal-directed behavior, that produces what? It's like you said, anger, okay? And you want to beat the brat. Provide some negative reinforcement. Okay, that's your need. That's not necessarily the child's need, okay? And the Lord gives you grace to control that. Don't take out your anger on your kid, all right? Don't take out your anger on your kid. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't discipline in anger. I think it's impossible not to be... when I paddled my little boy, when he disobeyed his mom just the other day, I let out some of the anger that I had because he disobeyed. But it was controlled. It was spirit control. So I cannot say I did not discipline with some anger, but it was controlled, spirit control. Okay? And so I don't say don't discipline in anger because that's unrealistic. But don't you discipline without being spirit controlled. Because he'll do the work of the devil, not the work of the Lord. Okay. So there are 2 different needs there. So your need can be met some other way. It doesn't have to be taken out on discipline of the child. The child does need, though, reinforcement, okay, or the SR bond established as quickly as possible. I mean, close to the experience as possible. That's a fact. That is a fact. And I got to tell you this, my brethren, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss opportunities when you're in public. You will miss opportunities to discipline your children in public. It's missed. Forget it. Did you hear me? It's missed. Forget it. Now, the older the child gets, the more they do respond to verbal cues. And so I can say to my elder daughter now, 9-year-old daughter, I say, Sherry, and she knows. I mean, that caught her right there. And she may know that we have a discussion, a hard discussion, and she'd rather be doing something else, which is kind of negatively reinforcing, okay? But if I'd caught her right there, I might have given her a swat, 9 years old notwithstanding, okay? So we just don't do that. Young lady, I'm ashamed. Okay, if she hollered at somebody or something. She doesn't do that very often. But it's rare. The older they get, the more they respond to verbal cues, my brethren. Okay, the younger they are, the more responsive they are. The less responsive they are to verbal cues, the less they understand. Okay, it depends on the child again. And the more some physical sort of a thing has to be done. But again, we're talking about negative reinforcement. Learn to give them positive reinforcement. I want one more quick. Just give this to you real quick. One more thing my folks did that really is devastating to this day to me. My mother did understand positive reinforcement because she picked that out of Spock. Okay, and she picked up some things, real quick, good things. You know, reward the kid. He didn't talk much about punishment. In fact, he talked about none of it. Don't do it, is what he said. So she got on to the positive jag. My dad was on the negative jag. That's all he ever knew. Okay? And my mother would for a long time would never punish me. She'd just say, "You're going to get it when your dad gets home." So I'd suffer. She'd torture me all day. And my dad would come home and paddle me good. You know, and I may not even understand what I'm being paddled for. Okay? Because she just believed in positive reinforcement, and my dad just believed in not sparing the rod. Okay, but that's miserable for a kid. But she used positive reinforcement too much, and we didn't have a lot. But what we did have was we had to eat when we were young, and so she would reward me with what? Food. Oh, just the word, you know. But I'll never forget 2 things that she always gave me that I loved the most. Cherries. She used to can cherries. I just love canned cherries because it was my reward. You know, I associate it with good things. Canned cherries just always attract me in the grocery store. My wife doesn't know what discipline I exercise to walk past the canned cherries. And cookies. Oh, the Cookie Monster and I have a lot in common. And if I did good, I'd get a cookie. Be careful that you don't reward a child just with, you know, food. Because then, when he gets older, and he's distressed or discouraged or something, you know, and he wants the good feeling, he'll fill up his mouth. That's right. Because food is reinforcing, positively reinforcing. That's all he knows. And the only time we had peace in our home, a lot of yelling. The only time we had peace was when we sat under the table, because the folks couldn't stand up, sat at the table. And so I associate peaceableness and good feeling with food. And it's a battle, because it's ingrained in my spirit, my human spirit, over and over and over again, through years, 18 years of being in that home. And they still do it to themselves. Bless their hearts. Oh, I've got a bunch of questions. Okay, I want to have to go, sir, ma'am, and then I'll get back to you, Joel.
Okay, two questions I have. You touched just lightly on both of them. One thing was about when you're in public with your child, and you said that just to get the opportunity. Are you saying that what I was thinking of doing when I had a child was if he did something wrong, then not do it there because you don't want to humiliate him, but after you get in the car or something, remind him of what he did, and then discipline him. Is that wrong?
The older he gets, the more he can appreciate it. But the farther you get away from the occurrence of the misbehavior, the harder it is for a bond to be, if you're going to talk about classical theory, or the harder it is for you to be able to reinforce that particular experience, because it's out of mind. See, time has passed and it gets interfered with. We call that interference. Too many interferences. Too many stimuli have come in between the stimulus and the negative reinforcement that you're trying to lay on it. Okay? So I say yes. That's probably not so good unless he's older, like in the teenage years, and really, it's difficult then, sir.
What about taking them out of the store and saying, we're going to go outside? We're going to go out.
Okay, she says take him out of the store, take him out into the back of the church. That's a possibility. Yeah, because you're starting to give some negative reinforcement right now. Okay, I told you not to do that. I've said this in church. I told you not to do that. I pick them up. Boy, they're tense. They sense Daddy's tense. You know, already the negative reinforcement is taking place, right? And now I'm on the verge of getting my tail, pounded. And it's mounting, see? The tension is mounting. Now when I get out there, the kid's terrorized already, right? It's a little child, this great big dad, I got him under my shoulder, under my arm, with his tail out toward me. Now that's hard on a child. He's had it's about all he can take, okay? So when I get out there, the Lord gives you wisdom. I'm controlled by the Spirit of the Lord. I want him to obey. I don't want him to disobey. He's got to learn that, okay? It doesn't take many of those experiences to learn. Once in a while you need a new association, okay? That's rare. It doesn't take many. But when I get him out there, the child has already had just about all he can handle, all right? I don't have to blister his bottom, okay? And I just get out there and go whap, whap. Now remember that. They're just releasing all the tension. And so the big job is to let him reduce the tension and explain things to him and be loving. I don't break fellowship. That's another thing my folks had a tendency to do. You see, because I was such a rebellious child, this is their philosophy. That after I was disciplined, there's a break in fellowship. Okay? Nothing to do with me for a while. And that's miserable. I mean, after the punishment, there ought to be a restoration of fellowship. Okay? I'm sorry. After the sorry, I love you. I love you. And so every time my little kids get punished, boy, there's a big huggy afterwards. Okay? Great big huggy. And you know what? I can probably count on two hands the times I've had to spank any one of my children. Even my eldest. Maybe, isn't that right, Judy? Sherry, maybe two hands? I mean, real. Is that right? Maybe Sherry more, but I bet Joe about that. We did a little bit more to our first one. Okay, who did I say was number two? Matt, excuse me.
Well, you just really covered what I was going to say. I was going to say you could turn the negative into a positive by administering love to your child after you've administered.
Yeah. Let me just let you finish up. But let me just say this. Brethren, when your kids do well and you're proud, you appreciate them, hey, go give them a huggy. Now listen, I'm not much of a touchy person, okay? I just am not. I'm not a hugger. I'm not a kisser, this type of thing. And a lot of folks, enjoy that. And I think we've got to be careful. Even we've got to be discreet. But boy, with my kids, I do ask the Lord to help me be more expressive. Now, when my little girls do something sweet, something nice, I don't want to tell them, okay? I want to give them a hug. I want to just at least say, boy, you were sweet. Sherry, I just appreciate your attitude. Honey, you just have the right attitude. That's all I can say. I want to say something positive. Reward your kids when they do well, okay? It'll stick in their mind. They appreciate it. I'll bet you they can count on a couple of hands how many times you've gone out of your way to say, well done, thou good and faithful child, or words to that effect. Isn't that right? We don't do it very often, do we? Go ahead and finish it.
And another thing that the Lord has really taught me to, when I administer the rod to my child, also Sherry, the Lord has shown me that it's not disobedience towards me. It's disobedience towards God. David said that sin is not sin in people's eyes, it's sin towards God. And when I realized that when my child was being disobedient, she wasn't being disobedient towards me, it changed my complete outlook on discipline.
That's an excellent point, and I should have said it before now, and I do thank you for that contribution. She made this statement. When a child learns that the Bible says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. When they disobey, they're not just disobeying me. It's not just an offense against me, the parent. They are disobeying the Lord, right? And it does affect your approach toward them. It does certainly affect your approach because you're ministering in place of the Lord. Who is number 3? Joel? Okay. Sir?
I used to have a daughter. I still do. And every time we get in church, she plays a little game, and I begin to see it. That she begin to cry and whine and be whining. When I take her out, she'd laugh and be enjoy it.
She knows reinforcement theory, doesn't she, Dad?
So I take her out immediately then, and I would discipline her, and I solved that problem through that, but it became a problem. We got in public, she would do that just to make a disturbance.
Did you hear that? She didn't like to be in church, see? So she knew some reinforcement theory from experience. She knew how to manipulate her daddy, okay? So she gets in church, and she starts agitating, okay, and fumbling around. When Daddy takes her out, then that's negative reinforcement to Daddy, okay? When she gets out, then she's happy and everything's fine. Daddy learned the game, and Daddy then decided to interfere. But she learned it. She learned it well. That's a good point. Sir?
Back to this further covered much of what I was going to say. When your child does something wrong in public, you find that you don't take them out then possible. They will pick up on that, and there will be a stimuli for them. They know that when you're in public, they act up and not get in trouble.
Yeah. That's right, that's right. It needs to be as near as possible. Now, you don't want to humiliate the child, and you don't want to be constantly drawing attention to yourself, but there are some periods of time, if you do it right, appropriately, the first time, or most of the time, the child will learn, and it will not have to be repeated. If it's having to be repeated, the same old infraction, the same old response to it, something's not right. You need some help, okay? You need to get to, someone who can help you. And I would try. There's a lot of learning to the ministry of discipline, learning theory. And I would say pick up a good book on psych, okay, good introduction to psych book, and learn some of this stuff, because God reveals himself not just through his word, but also through natural revelation. And when it doesn't contradict the word of God, it's useful to you, okay? You don't find in the Bible you should brush your teeth every day, but it really does help prevent dental caries, okay? Yes, ma'am? I can't hear you. Brings an excellent point. What if the child gets so terribly dependent upon your positive reinforcement that he can't function without it? All right, that's too much. Okay, that's giving too much. You don't have to give the child positive reinforcement every time he does it. Now, here's another principle to learn out of learning theory that really will help you. They have learned that a reinforcement schedule hitting someone every time after they do the desired response is not nearly as effective as doing it more erratically. Okay. Even every other time is not as good as just irregularly. Okay? And a regular schedule is better. So that really fits our humanity well, doesn't it? And a regular schedule. What that means is ask the Lord to give you wisdom, to give some positive reinforcement to the child. It doesn't have to be every time, okay? But ask the Lord to tell you when it would be appropriate and fitting. And for most of it, it just needs to be more often than what we're doing it. But every time, we'll develop unholy dependency, okay? But more often, we'll get more of the desired behavior. Are you hearing what I'm saying? The balance again, okay? How do you get balance? By being Spirit-led, Spirit-controlled, okay? And by knowing His Word. Sir?
I noticed one thing is if you give positive reinforcement, you give it every time. The reinforcement thing. If the child no longer goes to the goal, he goes to the goal to get the reinforcement, it's not because he did something. That's where we are in Christ. If we continually, every time we get down, we say the same prayer, and God does a reinforcement, our heart gets out of it, and we get our loving from it.
Yeah, I hear you.
We're not going for the goal. We're not learning anything.
Yeah, that's good.
We're just going through a process.
Yes.
Can we get a positive response from a negative behavior by, instead of reinforcing it with more negative, but reinforcing it with positive? Because if we've learned somebody does something wrong, you take it to the side instead of always happening, and if that's not working, you say, look, I know the Lord made you, a good kid, and I know the Lord has given you the ability to develop in this area. In other words, bringing some positive reinforcement into a negative situation. Does that work?
Well, I want to tell you this. The grace of the Lord is immense, okay? And I know your heart, and I know little Davy, and I say possibly you and that little guy can, you can make something work because he is getting some positive reinforcement for doing right. He wants to please you. But sister, these things are still real, okay? And if the child has just done something, some quick attention. It doesn't have to be a It doesn't have to be a heavy, aversive stimulus, negative stimulus. It can be something light, but there needs to be an expression of something negative, so he knows if he is so receptive to your relationship, okay? If he knows that the relationship is compromised by his performance, he needs to hear it, all right? Again, I can't tell you how to raise your child. God has to give each person wisdom. But this still is always working, okay? And no, it's confusing if you give some positive reinforcement, loving, caring concern when the kid's just done something wrong. That will tend to perpetuate that form of behavior. You got to be careful that you don't confuse him, okay? But it needs to be appropriate. I remember that there are a number of laws. I come out of an educational setting. There are a number of laws in public education that protect the child from being abused. But you don't have to worry about it if the discipline, the punishment, is fitting to the crime. So if a child gets out of his seat when he's not supposed to, that is no occasion to take the child to the back and whip him. Okay, although corporal punishment actually will be supported in the courts, even in America. Okay, if it's appropriate. It just has to be fitting to the crime. Okay, but even the law recognizes the fittingness, of the response to the crime, the reinforcement to the crime. I got to let you go, sister. I'll catch you real quick. All right, that's an excellent question. Let me just throw this out because we're going to leave learning unless you have a question the first thing. She asked if you use the rod before the child has an explanation. Can that be wrong? Yes, ma'am. If he doesn't understand, then you're just brutalizing the kid. All right? But if you think the child understands what he did, okay, then you apply the rod. Now, Johnny has been told often enough that he does what Mommy says, not what Johnny wants, okay? So I was able to come on the scene and give him the rod immediately, and he understood, okay? But to make sure, I did follow up with some explanation. Yeah. But when you think that he understands, I don't think it's wrong. But again, I don't beat the child, I just give him some aversive stimuli. He really it makes a lot of noise. Real quick, sir.
In response to her, I have another daughter. I respond to negative reinforcement constantly. I spanked her and she was doing good. The more I spanked her, the more she rebelled. And so then I began to go the other way and began to love her and hug her. And of course I do that. But I found out, I finally, she didn't respond to that either. She wouldn't respond to either one. And I was frustrated. And I just asked God, I said, God, what is it? And he showed me that it was a spiritual activity. The devil had focused in on her and constantly pestering her. Even her sleep, she wakes up with nightmares and all that. So then I began to war that way in the spirit.
Okay. Now another thing that will do that, besides the demonic attack, and my kids have been attacked, and we've gotten relief by not giving him access. But besides that, inconsistency will foul a relationship up with children. Okay, we need to be consistent. There's so much. Father, we pray that you'll help us to learn. There's so much more that we need to learn than what we've covered in this class. But Lord, I pray that this will be a stirring up experience so that these faithful people will study to show themselves approved unto you. If there's a lack or a limitation in their understanding, give them, Father, the intensity of heart and spirit to understand more and to set out to get knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from whatever source they can acquire it. Bless them now, Father, and don't let them be confused by some of the things we've just started. We pray, Lord, that you'll minister your peace and your rest when they've gotten the knowledge they need to have. Dismiss us with your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.